You know, there are moments in life that just stick with you, the kind of moments that feel like they could change everything in an instant. If you ask me about the moment I fell for my husband, I wouldn't say it was some dramatic fiery scene. No, it wasn't like the movies where everything is loud and messy. It was quiet, subtle, almost like a whisper that keeps nagging you in the back of your head. But when I think about it now, I can't help but wonder if it was just a slip or if I actually let myself get close to crossing a line I never thought I would. Okay, so I guess I should give you some context. I've been married to James for what, 6 years now? We met in college, the perfect couple. You know, he's that type of guy who always knows what to say, always smiling, always making sure things go smoothly. That was one of the things I loved about him. He made everything feel safe, and well, I think I took that for granted a little. You see, it wasn't like James was a bad husband. No, he was great. He's kind, he's funny, and honestly, he treats me well. But over time, something just shifted. I don't know if it was him or me or maybe both of us, but things just felt different. Not bad, but not the same. Like the spark we once had was starting to fade. And me, well, I didn't really notice until it was almost too late. Enter Greg, the gardener. Now Greg wasn't anything spectacular at first glance. He wasn't my type, and honestly, I didn't pay much attention to him at first. But when he started working on our lawn, trimming the hedges and making sure the garden looked perfect, I guess I started noticing him more than I should have. At first it was nothing. A friendly greeting here and there, a couple of small talks about the weather or the flowers we had planted. It was innocent, really. But Greg, oh, he was different. He didn't have that "I'm perfect" vibe like James did. He wasn't polished. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just himself, and I didn't realize how much I needed that until I started looking forward to his visits. It wasn't just the way he made the garden look beautiful or how he could fix anything, even the things I had no idea were broken. It was the way he listened. I could tell him about my day, and he didn't interrupt. He just listened, and that's something I hadn't realized I was missing. It's not like James didn't listen, but it was different. Greg listened in a way that made me feel like I mattered, like my words weren't just passing the time. And let's be honest, that's when things started to shift. It started small. I'd find myself making excuses to hang out near the window while Greg worked outside. Maybe I'd go out to ask him a question about the garden or offer him a drink, nothing major, just small moments that felt harmless. But looking back, I realized they were anything but. There was this one afternoon, though, that changed everything. I had just finished a meeting for work, and as I walked into the kitchen to grab a coffee, I saw him outside. He was trimming the bushes near the front porch, focused on his work. I don't know why, but that moment hit me differently. I wasn't thinking about my husband or our routine. All I could think about was Greg, and for the first time, I wondered what it would be like to get closer to him in a way that wasn't just about the garden. It felt wrong, but in a way that made my heart beat a little faster. I felt myself standing there, just staring at him, wondering how it would feel to actually talk to him about something other than the weather or the flowers. And then that's when he looked up, and we locked eyes. I don't know what happened next. Maybe it was the heat of the moment. Maybe it was just the fact that I hadn't felt that kind of attention in so long, but something shifted. That simple moment of eye contact lingered in the air. I could feel it before I knew it. He was walking up to the porch, and I found myself standing there, feeling a mix of excitement and guilt. He asked if I needed help with something in the garden, and we talked for a little longer than usual. At that point, I knew things were changing, but I didn't expect it to escalate. I didn't expect to feel the things I was feeling when I was around him, and I definitely didn't expect what would happen next. That evening, as I sat on the couch with James, I couldn't stop thinking about Greg. But the worst part was, I couldn't tell if it was just a passing thing or if I was actually on the verge of doing something I would regret. And then the phone rang. It was Greg. He said something that caught me completely off guard. I swear when the phone rang, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It wasn't anything unusual at first. I figured it was just Greg calling to confirm when he'd be back to finish up a project in the garden. But when I looked at the screen, something felt different. I didn't recognize the number, and for some reason that made my stomach twist. I hesitated for a second. Maybe it was just a wrong number. Maybe it wasn't even him, but then I don't know why I decided to answer. Hello, it was Greg's voice, but there was something in the way he said my name that caught me off guard. It wasn't casual like how he'd say it when he was here working. It was softer, almost more intimate. My heart started to race, and I had no idea why. Hi, it's Greg, he said. I hope I'm not disturbing you. No, not at all. What's up? There was a slight pause on the other end, and for a second I thought he might hang up. But then he spoke again, and his voice sounded even more serious. Listen, he started. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and I can't stop wondering if you feel the same way. I almost dropped the phone. I wasn't sure how to react. I mean, we were talking about Greg, the gardener. I had spent so many days chatting with him about nothing important. How is this even happening? Before I could respond, he continued. I know this might sound crazy, but I think you're incredible. And I think we could have something special, something neither of us expected. I didn't know what to say. My mind was a mess. My heart was pounding, and I was standing there in my kitchen still holding the phone. What was I supposed to say to that? Should I brush it off and pretend it never happened? Should I tell him that he was crazy? But something inside me, something that had been building for weeks, wanted to respond. I didn't. Not immediately, but I stayed quiet, letting the silence hang in the air between us. Then, almost as if he could sense my hesitation, he said, You don't have to say anything. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I thought you should know, but I get it if you don't feel the same way. It's just, I needed to tell you. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. He was being so honest, so vulnerable, and that did something to me. I hadn't felt this alive in months, maybe even longer. But before I could say anything back, I heard the front door open. It was James. I panicked. I quickly ended the call, saying something about needing to get dinner started. I hung up and shoved my phone in my pocket, trying to act like nothing had just happened. But inside I was a mess. My hands were shaking. My thoughts were racing. What was I even doing? Why had I let this happen? James walked into the kitchen, his usual cheerful self. He didn't seem to notice the change in me. I guess he was too distracted with his day to pay attention. He kissed my cheek and asked about dinner. I nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, I was far from okay. How could I sit here pretending like nothing was wrong when everything inside me was spinning out of control? It felt like I was living two lives. One with James, the safe, comfortable life I had always known, and one with Greg, the gardener, who made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. That night as we sat down for dinner, I tried to push everything aside, focus on the conversation with James, pretend like I wasn't still reeling from that phone call, but it was impossible. Greg's words kept echoing in my mind, and I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if I let this go any further. As James and I ate, I caught myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see Greg out there, like he might appear any moment and pull me out of this life I had built. But no, he wasn't there. It was just me and James sitting at the table, and I felt more alone than ever. That night after James had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion. I kept replaying the conversation with Greg over and over again, imagining what it would be like if I just let go of everything and took that step with him. But just as I was about to drift off, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Greg. I can't stop thinking about you. I won't push, but I need you to know you're more than just my client to me, and I think we both know there's something between us. I stared at the text from Greg for what felt like forever, my heart hammering in my chest. The words on the screen seemed to pulse like they were demanding my attention, begging me to respond. But what was I supposed to say to that? How could I even begin to process this? I can't stop thinking about you. Those words, they hit me harder than I cared to admit. I mean, it wasn't just about the message itself. It was about what it meant. Greg the gardener was making it clear that he felt something for me, and honestly, I felt it too. It had been building for so long now, those little moments of connection, those stolen glances. But to hear him say it out loud, to put it in words like that, it felt like everything was about to change. I was still lying there in bed, the phone in my hand, when I heard James stir beside me. His soft breathing, the kind of sound I'd grown used to over the years, pulled me back to reality. I quickly put the phone down, making sure the screen wasn't visible. I had to act normal. I couldn't let James know what was going on in my head, let alone what had just happened. But as I lay there pretending to sleep, all I could think about was Greg, the way he had looked at me that day, the way he had spoken to me like I was the only one who mattered. I had never felt so seen before, and I didn't know if I could just ignore that feeling. I tossed and turned, unable to find peace. Every time I closed my eyes, I could picture him, Greg, standing in front of me, looking at me the way James never did anymore. I thought about his words, and suddenly everything felt so tempting. There was this part of me, a part I didn't want to admit, that wanted to take a step closer to him, maybe even cross that line. But was I really ready to risk everything for something that might not even be real? The guilt started to gnaw at me. I loved James. He was my husband, my partner, my safe place. But in that moment, lying in bed with him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something I had found in Greg. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Greg's face, heard his voice in my head. I knew I had to make a choice, but I couldn't, not yet. The next day, things went on as usual. James left for work, and I went about my day, trying my best to keep everything together. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the tension built inside me. I couldn't stop thinking about Greg, and I couldn't stop wondering if he was thinking about me too. At lunch, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, and after a few minutes of hesitation, I typed out a message. "I've been thinking about what you said last night." My thumb hovered over the send button. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump, without knowing what was at the bottom. My stomach was in knots, but then I hit send, and then I waited. I knew I should have felt more guilty. I should have felt something. But all I felt was this strange mix of excitement and fear. I was doing something I never thought I would, but somehow it didn't feel completely wrong. It felt alive. Minutes felt like hours as I stared at the screen, waiting for him to reply. When the message finally came through, my heart skipped a beat. "I'm glad you reached out. I've been thinking about you too. More than I should, maybe." I read it over and over again like I was trying to make sense of what he was saying, but there was no denying it. He wanted me, and I wanted him. Just then I heard the front door open. James was home. My heart raced, and I quickly shoved my phone into my pocket, pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't normal. I wasn't normal, and I knew that deep down something was about to break. The rest of the evening was a blur. We had dinner, talked about the usual stuff, but I could hardly focus. All I could think about was Greg. I kept wondering what would happen if he came over again. What if he said something else? What if he made me realize that I was stuck in a life I didn't want anymore? I couldn't stop thinking about the way he made me feel, the way he saw me, and the way he cared. It was like he understood me in a way that no one else ever had, and I couldn't deny that it felt good, too good. That night as I lay in bed next to James, I could feel the distance between us growing, not because of anything he did, but because of what I was doing in my head. The thoughts I was having, the things I was considering. And then just as I was about to fall asleep, my phone buzzed again. It was from Greg. "I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. But I knew one thing for sure. I was on the edge, and it wouldn't be long before I'd have to decide which side I was going to fall on. The next day, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I felt like a different person, but the worst part, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back. Just as I was about to leave for work, I got another text from Greg. This one was different. "Meet me at the park. I can't stop thinking about you." I stood there staring at it, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a passing thing. It was happening. I was about to make a choice. The text from Greg weighed on me like 1,000 pounds. "Meet me at the park. I can't stop thinking about you." That simple message felt like a turning point. I had been dancing around the idea for days, but now it was real. It wasn't just a thought in my head anymore. It was an invitation that I couldn't ignore. I stood there in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, wondering who I was becoming. The woman staring back at me wasn't the one I used to know. She looked like someone on the verge of making a choice that could ruin everything. My whole life, my marriage, the trust I had built with James. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I couldn't. No, I shouldn't do this. But there was this pull inside me, this yearning, this craving that I couldn't shake. Greg had seen something in me that no one else had in a long time. He'd given me a kind of attention that I hadn't even realized I was missing. I glanced at the clock. I had just enough time to respond before I had to leave for work. My thumb hovered over my phone, and for a second I almost sent a message saying I can't do this, but the words wouldn't come instead. I typed back, "What time?" I didn't even think twice. My heart was racing as I hit send, and almost instantly Greg replied, "Whenever you can. I'll be waiting." That was it. I had just agreed to meet him, and now there was no turning back. I couldn't believe it. I was actually going to meet him, but a part of me didn't want to stop. I wanted to see where this would go, to see if the connection I felt with him was real. I had no idea what would happen once I met him, but deep down, I knew something would change, and that terrified me. I got in the car. My mind was spinning. I told myself it was just a meeting, nothing more. We'd talk. I'd tell him I wasn't interested, that I was happily married, and that this was all a huge mistake. But even as I thought that, I knew I wasn't being honest with myself. The park wasn't far from our house, and as I pulled into the parking lot, I saw him standing by the fountain waiting for me. My breath caught in my throat as I saw him. He was leaning against a tree casually with that same relaxed confidence he always had. But today there was something different about him. It was like the whole world around us had disappeared, and all I could focus on was him. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like jelly as I walked toward him, trying to steady my breathing. What was I doing? What was I about to do? He smiled when he saw me. "You came," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Of course," I replied, though I wasn't sure why I had. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was thick with something unspoken. It was like we both knew why we were here, and neither of us was ready to say it aloud. So I started trying to break the tension. "What did you want to talk about?" He stepped a little closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I needed to see you. I couldn't stop thinking about you. I wanted to know if you felt the same way." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my heart race again, but this time it wasn't from nervousness. It was from desire. A part of me wanted to reach out to close the space between us and see what would happen, but I pulled back, trying to stay composed. "I don't know what to say, Greg," I said quietly, unsure of where this conversation was going. "I'm married." He nodded, but his gaze never wavered. "I know, but I can't stop thinking about you, and I think you feel it too. There's something between us, something I can't ignore, and I don't think you can either." I felt my breath catch in my throat. His words were like fire burning me from the inside out. It was like he knew exactly what I needed to hear, and somehow it made everything feel so much more real. "I shouldn't be here," I said, trying to convince myself more than him. "I'm married to James. I can't do this." But he stepped closer, his hand brushing mine, sending a jolt of electricity through my body. "I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to," he said softly. "But I think we both know there's something here, and maybe it's something we both need to explore." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, my heart was pounding, and my whole body was screaming at me to run away. But I couldn't. I couldn't pull away from him, not now. We stood there in the park, just inches apart, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. One wrong move and I could fall, but I didn't know if I was ready to stop myself. Greg's voice broke through my thoughts again. "You don't have to decide anything right now. I just wanted to let you know how I feel, and if you ever want to talk more, I'll be here. But I'm not going to pressure you. I just needed to say it for myself." For a moment, I thought he might walk away, but he didn't. He just stood there waiting, giving me the space to decide what came next. As I turned to leave, I couldn't help but glance back at him, and for a moment, our eyes locked. I could see the longing in his gaze, and I could feel the pull between us. My heart was racing again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just about tea. It was about the choice I had to make. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it, but before I could take another step, I heard him call out my name. "Don't forget you're not alone in this." Just as I was about to leave the park, I heard Greg's voice calling me again. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to face him. There he was, standing under the tree, still watching me with those intense eyes. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I wanted to leave, to escape from all the emotions swirling around me, but something kept me rooted to the spot. "You're not alone in this," Greg said again, his voice steady but thick with meaning. What did he mean by that? Was he trying to convince me that this, whatever this was between us, was something more than just a passing attraction? Because in that moment, it didn't feel like a simple crush. It felt dangerous. It felt real. I couldn't deny it. The way he looked at me, the way he spoke to me, it was like he saw a side of me that no one else did. It was something I had been missing for a while, even before all of this started. The attention, the connection, it was intoxicating, and I didn't know how to stop it. I felt my pulse quicken as I took a hesitant step back toward him. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't make sense of any of this. It was like I was caught in a whirlwind, being pulled in every direction. Greg didn't immediately answer. Instead, he took a step closer, just enough to close the distance between us without fully crossing the line. "I know it's hard. I know you're conflicted, but I can't help the way I feel about you. And I think you know that this thing between us is real. You can feel it too, can't you?" I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. Was he right? Was this something real? Or was I just caught in the moment, swept up by a guy who knew exactly what to say to make me feel special? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was a quiet, "I don't know." I didn't know. I didn't know what to think. I loved James. I had built a life with him, and yet here I was, standing in a park, talking to the gardener who had somehow gotten under my skin in a way I couldn't explain. Greg's eyes softened as he reached out and gently touched my arm. It wasn't aggressive or forward. It was comfort, almost as if he was reassuring me that whatever choice I made, it was okay. But that wasn't true, was it? This wasn't just some innocent attraction. It was infidelity. It wasn't just some innocent attraction. I pulled away slightly, not enough to be obvious, but just enough to create some space between us. "I need to go," I said, my voice shaky. "I can't keep doing this, Greg." He didn't say anything. He just nodded, a faint understanding smile crossing his face. It wasn't a smile of victory, though. It was a smile that made me feel like I was falling deeper into something I had no control over. "Take your time," he said quietly. "I'll be here if you ever want to talk." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there alone in the park with my thoughts spinning out of control. I got back in the car and started driving, but it was like I was on autopilot. My mind was too clouded to focus on the road. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and without even thinking, I pulled it out. It was a message from Greg. "I know it's not easy, but I'm still thinking about you, and I'm not going anywhere." I stopped at a red light and just stared at the screen. His words felt like a magnet pulling me back toward him. I was torn in two. Part of me wanted to throw the phone out the window and forget this ever happened. But the other part, the part that had been hidden for so long, wanted to see where this could go. When I finally got home, I felt like I was carrying a weight on my shoulders. James was already home, sitting on the couch watching TV. He looked up when I came in, smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. He could tell something was off. I could feel it. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice casual but his gaze intense. "Yeah, just a long day," I nodded, forcing a smile. He didn't say anything else, but I could feel the tension between us. He didn't know it, but I was keeping a huge secret, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him what had happened, but the guilt was eating away at me. The part of me that still loved James couldn't believe I was even considering what Greg had offered. I hadn't planned any of this. I hadn't wanted to get caught up in this mess. But now that I was here, I didn't know how to get out. That night after dinner, I went to bed early, hoping sleep would numb the storm inside me. But sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts kept circling back to Greg, the way he had looked at me, the way he had touched my arm, the words he had said. I couldn't shake it, and then just as I was finally starting to drift off, my phone buzzed again. It was from Greg. "I can't stop thinking about you, and I'm not letting go, not yet." I didn't know how much longer I could keep up this act, the lies, the secrets. It was starting to feel too heavy to bear. The next day, as I was getting ready for work, I got another message from Greg. This one was different. This time, it wasn't just words, it was a photo of him standing by the tree in the park, holding a note with my name on it. "I'm waiting for you." And suddenly I realized I couldn't avoid this forever. I stared at the photo for what felt like an eternity, the image of Greg standing under the tree, a note with my name in his hand. The words echoed in my head. "I'm waiting for you." I felt like the ground was slipping away beneath me. What was happening? This wasn't just a fleeting flirtation anymore. It wasn't something that could be brushed off or ignored. He was waiting for me. He was pushing for more. And part of me, no matter how hard I tried to deny it, was ready to give it to him. I glanced over at James, who was getting ready for work. He was humming to himself, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. The calmness of his presence, the way he moved around the house as if everything was perfectly fine, only made the tension in my chest worse. How could I be living two completely different lives at once? How long could I keep this up? I quickly shoved the phone back into my bag, trying to force my mind back to reality, but reality felt so far away. I had built a life with James. We had memories, dreams, plans, and yet here I was, caught up in something that threatened to tear it all apart. By the time I made it to work, I felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything was distant, unclear. My thoughts kept drifting back to Greg, to that damn message, to his eyes, his voice. How had I let this happen? Was it even possible to go back to the way things were? I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, trying to focus on something, anything other than the overwhelming pull I felt toward Greg. And then out of nowhere, my phone buzzed again. I didn't even need to look at it. I already knew who it was. "Greg, I can't keep waiting. You know I need to see you. I need to know where this is going." The words hit me like a slap to the face. My hands trembled as I read them. There was no ambiguity in his message. He was done waiting. He was ready to take this to the next level. The thing is, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I felt trapped between two worlds that didn't belong together, trapped between the man I married, the man I thought I knew, and the gardener who had stirred something inside me I couldn't ignore. I glanced around the office, trying to steady my breathing. No one was paying attention to me, but I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail. I hesitated before pressing play, my fingers cold as they hovered over the screen. And then I heard his voice. Greg's voice, soft, low, filled with an intensity I couldn't escape. "I'm not asking for much, just a moment, just some time to figure out what this could be. Please don't shut me out." I closed my eyes, trying to steady the whirlwind inside my chest. I didn't know what to do with this. How could I even think about giving him what he wanted? How could I walk away from my life, from my marriage, just to chase a fantasy with someone who wasn't part of that life? But Greg wasn't letting me off the hook. He kept pushing. He was waiting for me, and somehow it felt like I was running out of time. I looked at the clock. It was almost time for lunch. I had a decision to make, and I couldn't keep pretending like I didn't. My phone buzzed again. "Where are you? I'll be waiting for you. Don't make me wait too long." I felt the walls closing in on me. My thoughts were jumbling. I needed to make a choice, but I couldn't see the way forward. My heart was torn between the man I had promised myself to and the man who had awakened something inside me I didn't know was there. After what felt like forever, I stood up from my desk, grabbing my bag and heading toward the exit. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't want what Greg was offering, even though I knew it meant risking everything. As I walked to my car, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just conflicted. I wasn't just torn. I was choosing. In that moment when I started the engine, I knew there was no going back. I pulled out of the parking lot, my mind racing, and then just as I was about to drive to the park, I got one last message from Greg. Come or don't, but I'm not waiting forever. And just like that, I was at a crossroads. Was I going to show up, or was I going to walk away from something that had consumed me for days? You know, there are moments in life that just stick with you. The kind of moments that feel like they could change everything in an instant. If you ask me about the moment I fell for my husband, I wouldn't say it was some dramatic, fiery scene. No, it wasn't like the movies where everything is loud and messy. It was quiet, subtle, almost like a whisper that keeps nagging you in the back of your head. But when I think about it now, I can't help but wonder if it was just a slip or if I actually let myself get close to crossing a line I never thought I would. Okay, so I guess I should give you some context. I've been married to James for 6 years now? We met in college, the perfect couple, you know? He's that type of guy who always knows what to say, always smiling, always making sure things go smoothly. That was one of the things I loved about him. He made everything feel safe, and well, I think I took that for granted a little. You see, it wasn't like James was a bad husband. No, he was great. He's kind, he's funny, and honestly, he treats me well. But over time, something just shifted. I don't know if it was him or me or maybe both of us, but things just felt different, not bad, but not the same. Like the spark we once had was starting to fade, and me, well, I didn't really notice until it was almost too late. Enter Greg, the gardener. Now, Greg wasn't anything spectacular at first glance. He wasn't my type, and honestly, I didn't pay much attention to him at first. But when he started working on our lawn, trimming the hedges and making sure the garden looked perfect, I guess I started noticing him more than I should have. At first, it was nothing. A friendly greeting here and there, a couple of small talks about the weather or the flowers we had planted. It was innocent, really. But Greg, oh, he was different. He didn't have that I'm perfect vibe like James did. He wasn't polished. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just himself, and I didn't realize how much I needed that until I started looking forward to his visits. It wasn't just the way he made the garden look beautiful or how he could fix anything, even the things I had no idea were broken. It was the way he listened. I could tell him about my day and he didn't interrupt. He just listened. And that's something I hadn't realized I was missing. It's not like James didn't listen, but it was different. Greg listened in a way that made me feel like I mattered, like my words weren't just passing the time. And let's be honest, that's when things started to shift. It started small. I'd find myself making excuses to hang out near the window while Greg worked outside. Maybe I'd go out to ask him a question about the garden or offer him a drink. Nothing major, just small moments that felt harmless. But looking back, I realized they were anything but. There was this one afternoon, though, that changed everything. I had just finished a meeting for work, and as I walked into the kitchen to grab a coffee, I saw him outside. He was trimming the bushes near the front porch, focused on his work. I don't know why, but that moment hit me differently. I wasn't thinking about my husband or our routine. All I could think about was Greg, and for the first time, I wondered what it would be like to get closer to him in a way that wasn't just about the garden. It felt wrong, but in a way that made my heart beat a little faster. I felt myself standing there, just staring at him, wondering how it would feel to actually talk to him about something other than the weather or the flowers. And then that's when he looked up, and we locked eyes. I don't know what happened next. Maybe it was the heat of the moment. Maybe it was just the fact that I hadn't felt that kind of attention in so long, but something shifted. That simple moment of eye contact lingered in the air. I could feel it before I knew it. He was walking up to the porch, and I found myself standing there, feeling a mix of excitement and guilt. He asked if I needed help with something in the garden, and we talked for a little longer than usual. At that point, I knew things were changing, but I didn't expect it to escalate. I didn't expect to feel the things I was feeling when I was around him, and I definitely didn't expect what would happen next. That evening, as I sat on the couch with James, I couldn't stop thinking about Greg.